Hey folks, nice to see you all. Good morning. Thanks for coming out today. So as Nita shared, my name is Adolfo. I am the field organizing director of the National Young Farmers Coalition. I got into agriculture. My grandparents were agrarians, I'd say, even more than farmers. And I got into agriculture full time because my partner, Ivy, we were living at the time in Los Angeles, and she studied agriculture, and she basically said that I don't really see myself doing anything else other than being an agrarian. So she went to the Wendell Berry farming program, and we went to Kentucky, and then after that we moved to the Asheville area. So I thank her for committing us to this life, for sure. So the premise of this presentation is the following: we don't take agricultural politics seriously enough in this country. Like I'm just gonna pretty much break it down to that, and then I'm gonna sort of like try to get us to the point where we've got to have like a paradigm shift in terms of the way that we think about agricultural policy, agricultural politics, and what we're talking about here. It's like an extremely, extremely serious question that I feel like sometimes gets like boiled down to like a few slogans like here and there, and like a lot of our activism, right? But I do think, and I'll show you why I think it's like a few slogans, and I think it has to do with the fact that like sometimes we talk about this country as if it's like a country of like 50 million people. It's 300 and so million people, and 160 million registered voters, all stakeholders in the future of agriculture, right? So problem, resourcing young farmers. Solution, we have got to build a national network. Okay, so first I want you all to stop and think, right? So I want you to think about any image that you have right now about agriculture, agricultural politics, what we need to get to a certain point in terms of your dreams for agriculture. And then I want you to think about the fact that in this country, we are around 160 million registered voters, all stakeholders in the future of agriculture, right? Blue states, red states, purple states, which is like the traditional version of ourselves. And then the true version of ourselves is independents, radicals, all kinds of things that we are naturally because we are human, right? And so the question is, can we resource farmers and ranchers without conservation, deliberation, debate, collaboration, however important, successful, insightful we might be individually, right? And then to add to this is the extremely sophisticated nature of agricultural politics, which I think is like one of the most sophisticated parts of, I would call, republic building and nation building, right? And I basically pulled out Loka Ashwood, who's one of our community partners in Kentucky, and Loka just became a MacArthur Fellow. She won a Genius Grant. And basically what I'm saying, our movement also includes like world-esteemed professors and all kinds of stuff. So it's like it's a really important field of folks, right? So in order for us to do that, before I move into what National Young Farmers is, I want to take us back to like what it is that we're doing and what it is that we need to go to, right? So pretty much like, and this is like the history part. A lot of folks essentially pin down like the way that we think about rural America to like the American Revolution, right? So pretty much the way that a lot of folks talk about it is that in colonial times, pretty much we were considered, or this society was considered backwards because we had a whole bunch of rural areas. And places like England were civilized because of London, blah, 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 and things of the sort. And to an extent, through this revolution, for all of its like inherent problems and stuff, one of the things that we pretty much, that was proposed was that farmers basically represented integrity, right? Farmers represented integrity in the creation of a republic. And this basically goes back to ancient Greece, right? This goes back to Greek agrarianism. And the ancient Greeks basically had this belief that like you build a republic with the farmer, the yeoman, and there's like a book by Hesiod. I mean, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but fundamentally speaking, what it basically means is that farmers have integrity. Our agrarianism goes back to ancient Greece. It's an inherent part of the foundations of this republic, integrity in the republic and things of the sort. And the whole idea was that our republic would remain sort of like a really integral place because we were farmers, right? And then skip to like the 19th century, industrialization comes to this, hits us pretty hard in this country, and suddenly like anti-urbanism, agrarianism becomes super popular. Folks, Bostonians, wealthy Bostonians are buying farms. Folks are kind of like, I don't necessarily want to live in this place with smokestacks. And then you skip, that's the second, we say, strong period of agrarianism. And then you skip to the Great Depression in the 1930s, where like Southern agrarianism emerges, the New Deal emerges, which is like a really high point in thinking about farming, and a really high point in thinking about farming where folks start to do things like farmer democracy with the New Deal. It's like often forgotten. You have like a Secretary of Ag who's basically sitting down with folks and saying that the future of this thing is farmer democracy, and doing something called like sitting down with farmers and asking them what they think, which is like pretty much what is going to be considered Occupy Wall Street or something like that, with like open meetings. You know, literally speaking, is basically being done by the Department of Agriculture, right? And as all this is basically happening, I think something else happens in this society where a bunch of folks from Kentucky, like the Kentucky diaspora, moves up to this big city called Chicago with a big urban market and starts to sing about things like whippoorwills and like birds on posts. And that's the foundations of country music, right? Which is kind of like this new like working class agrarianism where the word farm isn't always said, but it's implied farm, right? So like when Tammy Wynette is singing Stand By Your Man, it's essentially Stand By Your Man according to the values of agrarian America. Or when Willie Nelson is singing Whiskey River, he's basically saying, Whiskey River, take my hand, because I'm struggling with the idea that like I can't become this thing that I want to be, and that thing is a farmer, someone with integrity. Or when Taj Mahal, you know, a black folk musician, is basically saying, I'm going to paint my mailbox blue. It's basically saying, like, after Reconstruction and moving up to Chicago, I'm kind of tired of these cities as a black man, and I want to be a farmer, right? So this country is basically two things emerge in this country. One is rational agrarianism, which is basically what you would call federal policy today, right? Which is like, it has to work, it has to make money, it's in the Farm Bill, but it's still good for you. You know, it's still whippoorwills and cowboy boots and that kind of stuff, and health. And then I think romantic agrarianism, which I think is the true sentiment in this country, right? But I think we often lie and we present ourselves as these like super rational people, even if I do think fundamentally speaking, we're emotional people and we feel this farming thing in our hearts, right? And then to the point where we're at right now, which is pretty much where I think that we have essentially gone from that kind of nation building and republic building to, might I say, a plurinational republic, a republic of many nations, for example, the Lakota Nation, right? A plurinational nation where the roots of American farming and agrarianism are not only now part, like the Greek, the Puritan, the English, the French, the German or the Dutch of immigrants, but it's also Hopi agrarianism, right? It's also Comanche agrarianism and environmentalism, which is like all these like beautiful scenes in Utah of riding your horse and that kind of stuff. You know, you can thank the Comanches for that and that kind of stuff. But it's a mix, right? And so we've gotten to this fact that we are 160 million registered voters in a 300 million person country that is a plurinational country wherein we essentially have to learn to speak to one another in order to build a world in common, right? And it's like, and it's pretty big, right? And so what we've essentially become is we've become a network on land. Okay, so I'm gonna basically speak about National Young Farmers for a little bit, and I'm gonna go back to this. And what essentially, the way that I want you all to think about National Young Farmers is, I don't want you to applaud me or to praise me. I want you all to think about National Young Farmers as part of a larger network that you all participate in. And I want you all to uphold me to the very same thing that I'm going to uphold you to, which is the fact that without collaboration, deliberation, and hard conversation, we can't build the world that we want to build, right? So I'm going to present myself here, and I'm not going to do it in a way. I'm not going to do it with like an an evangelist or something. I'm going to say just remain yourself. Join National Young Farmers if you're really down with it. But let's learn to think about that we need to learn how to collaborate, right? So National Young Farmers, we are grounded in focus, intentional and sustainable, adaptable and dynamic, creative and bold, collaborative and communicative, transparent and direct, accountable and trustful, conscientious and healing, gracious and celebratory, right? We're doing all these things. We center BIPOC farmers. We fundamentally feel that like the ethos of this thing should not only be about wearing suits and ties, but it also should be about music and dance and joy and love and just being young. That's part of it. We've got a chapter model everywhere, and we fundamentally respect everyone, but we ask folks to respect, to love this place as what it is, right? So to not only embrace black folks for for the racial justice aspect, but to embrace black folks as perhaps it's that person's fate to be a handsome rancher, a black handsome rancher. And it's to support that also, the person thriving in their abundance and their prosperity. Okay. So we do land acknowledgments, and we fundamentally believe that we are on native land. And my position is that I think we need to go from that to actually going from that and giving folks land back. But that's our position. We are on native land. And our big thing right now is increasing Land Access, Security, and Opportunities Act, which is a marker bill. And all these folks that you see listed are folks who we're working with in order for us to get land access for young farmers. The way that I see it is that we basically support both rational agrarianism, farming, ranching, pastoral life, and also romantic agrarian. I'm a romantic agrarian. I think that the whole point of this thing is to feel good and is to be fulfilled and satisfied. And pretty much, we support all of that through land access. Because what essentially we say is, whatever you want to do, right? If you want to feel like either Tammy Wynette or if you want to get rich with a ranch, you've got to have land, right? And so pretty much, we essentially we fight to gain land access. And that's our marker bill right now. That's part of the whole farm bill negotiation. Okay. And then now we basically go back to what it is that you and I need to build together, right? First, we need to accept the fact that farmers live in a network society, right? And Manuel Castells is a big-time Spanish professor who I think really speaks about the network society in a good way. The network society pretty much means this, is that we're all basically in a form of society called the network society where we're all connected through information channels, right? So once upon a time, the Western was like some sheriff guarding a bank. Now the sheriff is like a kid doing IT guarding the server so that your bank account number doesn't get hacked, right? So that's basically what the network society is, right? In this network society, there are centers of they're basically centers of flow. Right? It's a basically complicated concept that I think I will boil down to basically it's like a body full of chakras, right? And basically what these chakras are, these are places where debate, collaboration, information, and all kinds of things flow so that we can accomplish things, right? One of those things is government. It exists in different ways in different societies. For example, in Brazil, a really cool minister of culture put together a project called Puntos Culturais, where they literally thought of Brazil as a body full of chakras and where you massage the chakras, right? So Denver would be a place where you massage the chakras, where you'd get, for example, ranchers, black folks, brown folks, indigenous folks, conservative folks. You'd get folks to you'd massage the relationship so that folks start to collaborate, right? Another version of that is the coffee house in French society and European society, right? And right now, the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, has a project called 1,000 Cafes, where they basically feel that one of the reasons why rural France has a bunch of issues is because cafes are closing left and right. And without cafes, they can't actually have the flow that the society needs in order for them to accomplish things, right? Basically, what I'm going to propose to you all is that in this country, we've got to get past the fact that Social media is extremely important, right? And social media manifests the network society, but we've got to learn how to speak to one another and work with each other and communicate in ways that lead us to the place that we need to get to in order for us to be a network society that accomplishes the things that we want to accomplish, right? So we have to be intentional about building networks. As in, you have to wake up in the morning and say, hey, I belong to a network within networks. I belong in a tradition where we try to build communities. I'm an agrarian or whatever it is that I am, and I need to be perpetually building a network in order to participate in a flow of information, ideas, and decision-making that lead us forward, right? Which essentially means I need to respect you and you need to respect me. And it also means like I've got to speak real with you and you've got to speak real with me, right? And it also means you've got to not make assumptions about me, as in like a good example of that is like as a black man, I may not be farming because of social justice for my ancestors. I may think I look good on a horse. And you've got to respect that, right? So pretty much. So I think that like when we build these networks, we've got to essentially respect who we are in order to get there. I'm going to push it further and say we don't know how to do that as a country. I'm essentially going to say that like as a country, the problem is that agrarianism, I think, is the most profound critique of what it is that pains us, right? And I think that the thing is the inability for us to fulfill like the life that we know that we can fulfill, right? It's like we're chock full of potential. There's so much inherent beauty in this culture, and like if you think about like things like the civil rights movement or the feminist movement or just like what's happening in communities all around the country, it's really fascinating to compare the U.S. to like, I mean, when basically societies like French societies and English societies like declared abolition, and how long it took us and how quickly we went. Like, that's our potential as a society. And it's like, I think that there's something wherein we are isolated, thus we're alienated from ourselves, and we're basically just like devising things in our head without realizing that's not really thinking. To think with each other is to sit down with each other and come to terms with who we are and what it is that we're living in order for us to push the needle forward. Right? So basically what I'm basically saying is that we're misusing and we're assuming that social media is going to get us somewhere. We don't have 3,000 friends, right? We have 10 friends, right? Some of us have 5 friends, and that's fine. And we need more friends. And more than that, we need to actually sit and speak with one another in order for us to get to where it is that we want to get to as farmers and ranchers, right? Okay. So I'm going to basically push it here a little bit more. I hope I have enough time for this because I want to have some questions. But basically, what it is that we basically need to build as a network is we need a 2-tiered network of supporters, and it needs to be a public-private partnership, right? One of the things that we need to realize is that, like, the network within the network, so within the network of the folks who live in this land, the networks are not only I am a rancher and a farmer, but I think that it's fundamentally the first tiers I care about food. Right? I care about food, and I think that like it's really sitting down and thinking and sitting down with folks who care about food. And for the folks to come to terms with the fact that like you're never going to live in the nation that you live in if you don't buy bulk from farmers. You're never going to live in the nation that you want to live in if you don't buy directly from farms. You're never going to live in the place where you live in if you don't support farming and ranching, flat out, right? Just like I'm never essentially going to live in that place if I don't support your love of food, if I don't support your creations and your restaurants and things of the sort, right? So we need to support each other within this network. The second network of supporters is the network that is we want to get somewhere with farming and ranching. And the reason why it has to be a public-private partnership is because the public sector should not only finance, I believe, should not only based in decision-making, but the process by which we arrive at decision-making, whether it's like the town hall, etc., should also be a part of the way that we govern ourselves, right? And basically what I mean by that is that we've got to enter a public-private partnership in order to speak together, right? Especially since so much of what we're doing in agriculture is like just like we assume that we're all aligned, but we're all so different, right? And the pictures is, for example, planting and graphing is from like an old text, like it's like English, so it's like Greek roots or whatever. And then we've got folks who are, who are slaves, pretty much like cotton farmers, and there's the history of that in our society, and we've got to speak to folks who come from that tradition. There's Wendell Berry. I don't know if you all know Wendell Berry, and that's an extremely important tradition. And then I also added a painting called Tilled Fields by a painter named Miro, who's a surrealist, right? And so, like, you can be surrealist about farming. You can paint about it. You can be super romantic about it. It doesn't have to be like, you know what I mean? So it's like all of us together, how do we put all these aspects of the movement, how do we all talk together, right? In order to do that, we basically need to build this network of supporters, and based on the fact that we live in a network, a plurinational network. Okay, and then the guardrails fundamentally is we need to work, right? So if we build our network, it has to be based in work, and that's the beauty of us. It has to be based in both work and rhetoric, right? But a lot in work. And second of all, it has to respect folks. It has to basically respect where we've gotten as a country. And then finally, this is how you stay in touch with me, and then I have to basically stay in touch with you, right? As someone from an organization, this is how you stay in touch with me, and I have to learn how to stay in touch with you, right? So, and I want to end this by the fact that at National Young Farmers, we've essentially started a monthly call series called The Front Porch, where we're trying to do that, right? So our critique is that as a society, we've essentially moved away from the front porch. I was speaking to a sociologist the other day, and he basically said that even if you look at the American house now, right, we went from the front porch to the back room where we have a TV, right? Let's go back to the front porch, to that form of hospitality, to the rocking chair, even if they're extremely expensive now, and actually learn to talk to one another in order to build the thing that we want to live in, right, through work and through conversation. So thank you, folks. I wish I could go a lot deeper, and I don't know if I have any time for questions, but any questions that you all want to ask about how to get right in this society.
I think we can take 2, maybe 3, depending on how long or complex the questions are.
So, as the Young Farmers Coalition, it seems to be a mentorship-based kind of program to connect with successful farmers. Is that kind of the idea, and all through the spectrum, as far as all types of farms, and to bring up the youngsters? Is that correct?
Sorry, I feel like I made the assumption that we all know what National Young Farmers here is. Sorry. So National Young Farmers is we are personally a community of activists and advocates. And pretty much we have a whole bunch of programs, including we focus on farmer mental health. So we administer Cultivemos. We essentially organize farmers. We have a chapter program. And we basically advocate for federal policy. And the chapter program is really active in Colorado. But it's pretty much where folks have chapters with chapter leaders who define the work that they engage in and try to move the needle forward for young farmers. And fundamentally, we try to resource young farmers. So if that means, yes, we do have a mentorship program, which is like the Farmer to Farmer Education Act.
Okay, I got you. I come from the photography world, and I literally got a degree in photography and public relations and mass comm. And I didn't know what I was doing until I was mentored for 6 years by some of the best photographers in the world. And I never, ever would have been successful as a commercial advertising photographer if that mentorship system wasn't available. And I really had to look for it. It was really hard to find the mentorship. There wasn't an organized program, so if that's what this is moving towards, like, please, let us know how we can help, because I see that as being a huge divide, just educationally in our country. It's like you graduate from college and then, internship, but for people like farmers and like, how do you get the knowledge from the elders, if you will? I see just a huge gap in that, and it seems like it might even be more challenging for young farmers because farmers are so spread out. But thank you for doing what you do, and the message about networking was really, really good. Thank you.
For sure. Thank you so much. I think what you're saying, for some reason, it reminds me of a song that I like by Neil Young called Old Man. It's like, old man, take a look what you see. So I think that, like, in terms of networking and conversations, I think also, like, perhaps not being ageist and allowing ourselves to speak, like, between generations. And so I think that's also, like, I embrace a mentorship, but I think part of that is also, like, agreeing to the fact that we're like different generations, have different experiences, and we've got to learn to speak to one another and to our own experiences in order to get somewhere. Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you so much. What an inspiring way to open the day. My name's Cole Bush. I'm agrarian educator and advocate from Southern California. Respect. Thank you. I have a question, humbly on my knees, asking what is your personal position and also the National Young Farmers position for a call to action or immediate things that we can do as agrarians given large political shifts? What can we do now to be, one, supportive of one another, but also just be prepared for shifts in terms of the support that government has given us? What does this look like?
I think that's a very good question, and right now those are two very good questions, like what my position is and what the National Young Farmers. So I would say that, like, for one, the National Young Farmers, we're still deliberating on that, and the reason why we're still deliberating on that is the National Young Farmers essentially is guided by a national survey. So, and we also have a farmer board. So we're, like, weirdly enough an organization that we can't actually jump in and do things even if they seem extremely urgent. Like our national survey, basically everything that we work on comes from our national survey. And our national survey is basically we survey 10,000 farmers, some folks who are part of our network and some folks who are outside of our network in order to move forward. So whatever we do vis-a-vis the new administration will be in consultation with young farmers. And I would say that I work for young farmers, right? It was one of the reasons I like working for National Young Farmers. Like, it may seem like it, but I'm not like the philosopher of field organize, I got to do the thing. And I think the second thing, I think that for me, what I think personally about what's happening in this country right now, I think that, like, how can I explain this? Like, there's a part of me that, like, sort of like, especially since I live in the Appalachian Mountains, there's a part of me that looks at it and I'm just like, like, in this society we have this, like, really old outlaw tradition, right? It's like all these, like, outlaw ballads that we like, and, like, since, like, Ireland and that kind of stuff, and, like, there's like John Henry and, like, that kind of stuff. And I do think that, like, there's some positions that folks are put in, or there's some positions that fester and soar that are not addressed, that basically, whether they be, like, educational positions or whatever it may be, misogyny, or also just, like, the need for social services or things of the sort, that I think folks seek outlaws, I think. And I think that folks seek, we would say, opportunities or vehicles or apparatuses to get certain things accomplished. And I do think that, like, we seem to, like, disagree as a country in terms of, like, how it is that we can get to the place that we need to get to. And I think we need to go back and really ask ourselves, where are we trying to, because it seems like we don't necessarily, like, we don't necessarily agree that we agree on the fact that we're trying to get to a certain kind of place. Right, so that's my position. As you all know, I'm wearing the National Young Farmers hat now, so I'm not going to go deep. We can talk about it afterwards. But I do think for the National Young Farmers Coalition, we're in the process of deliberating. We're taking the position. We have a farmer board, a national survey, and that kind of stuff. And as you know, like, we basically are obliged to take what farmers feel seriously, and that will come from our farmer board, our leadership team, and the farmers that we serve.
Hi, my name is Cindy. I do the technical coordination for our high school program. And so my question is, do you do any sort of alignment or coordination working with the FFA chapters throughout the nation? Because those are definitely future farmers. And also, with the food shortages and higher prices we have, I love the book by Malcolm Gladwell on Tipping Point. Do you think we're nearing the tipping point for society to become more interested in, hey, is my food always going to be in that grocery store? Am I going to have good food? So I guess 2 questions there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So in terms of like working with the FFA, I think that we work with a ton of folks. Like, I don't know if we'd work. So for example, I just had a conversation with like the veteran liaison at the USDA, right? So like we work with a ton of folks. We could work more in partnership with the folks that you're proposing. I don't think we work with them as closely as we work with folks on like land access, on like getting land access. But those are all like strategies and tactics that we can take in order to accomplish stuff. But all that is determined by our national survey. And because essentially folks have determined that we should be focusing on land access, we essentially seek partnerships, right? So in terms of the tipping point, I think that's a really good question. I think that to me, and there's a reason why I kind of spoke about like romantic agrarianism. I fundamentally think that like one of the, like what it is that I think that we're doing in the society, like with agriculture, I think that it has to do with like the price of food and that kind of stuff. But I also think fundamentally speaking, it has to do with like anti-agrarian or anti-urban or agrarian sentiment in this society, like wanting to be healthy and wanting to live with like birds and posts, and like there's also the urban farming crowd, which I think has to do with like building new cities that feed themselves. But I think all of that is essentially traditional in our society. And so I think we basically like whatever we call agriculture in the society comes from a long tradition. And I think a lot of this tipping point thinking I think is very, I think it's certainly the conjuncture that we're in, but I think there's something structural about agriculture. So I think it's both what you're saying about the tipping point and addressing that, and I'm sure that's for policymakers and senators and congresspeople and advocates and really thinking about how agriculture and producing our own food has to do with that. But I think the structural aspect of our society of agriculture is like it's wanting to live that life, wanting to be that person, and gaining access to land in order to be that person. So I agree with you, and I think it's mixed with the structural, because I think economies go up and down. Yeah.
Let's see. I see your hand. I'm going to scan this half of the audience.
Hey, this one's quick. I just wanted to say to this guy, the mentorship programs you're talking about, Quivera, coalitions, apprenticeship programs fit that mold really well. And also I wanted to ask you, just so everyone can hear it, because it was asked yesterday, what constitutes a young farmer?
That's a really good question, I think. So I think officially, a young farmer is someone that is I would say below 40, but I think that to me, a young farmer is anyone who's alive and feels young, right? For our purposes, for sure. For our purposes, I think a young farmer is someone who is below the age of 40, is sort of relatively new to this thing, and someone that we're resourcing. Further than that, I think from a metaphysical point of view, I think that in terms of like who a young farmer is and like the history, I think a young farmer is a dreamer, a poet, a worker, a craftsperson. I think a young farmer has a place in the American cosmos, right? It's like someone who like wants to work with their hands, someone who dreams, someone who takes a risk, etc. So I hope I answered your question with those 3 things, for sure.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Cindy DeVerksen. I'm from Southwest Colorado, and I've got a whole career working in agriculture. What I see in my work as a business management consultant and educator is that there's a 3rd, 4th, 5th generation component of our agricultural community that is young. They're going to be inheriting a whole lot of land, and they're very, very lost. they are not part of this group, and they don't feel welcomed in anything like this. And I don't know, how can we reach out to that cohort of agricultural people? And yes, the agrarian imperative, that's kind of what you're talking about. I mean, that runs through anybody who, no matter what their age is, you know, you have this agrarian imperative. And I think that's what everybody here is about. So I personally don't think there should be a division between 40 plus and 40 younger. So I would just like to see more diversity and being honored in agriculture, and not so much division between different groups and different segments of the ag community.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's like a really good observation, really good questions. I would say that, look, what if we take that and we think of that as like an opportunity, right? So young farmers, we believe that we're the generation that can make a change. I think the change that you're basically talking about in terms of like folks who are inheriting land, feeling integrated, right? It seems to be that like it can be an opportunity. And perhaps like the question, because you know our society is like a really bizarre one. Because to an extent, I had a really good friend who basically has pointed this out to me. He's basically told me, you know, like there's so many questions that we essentially have the resources to actually accomplish, right? Whether they may be like ag schools or actual schools or budgets and things of the sort. And it's like, to me, fundamentally, this question of inheriting land and what do we do with this generation, like who is answering that question, I think is what we have to ask ourselves. We have the resources. I mean, the ag schools in Colorado are extremely wealthy. They're using tax dollars, right? And so if this is like a major question in terms of how the state moves forward, like who should be the stakeholders and how should your tax dollars be applied to solving this question? We've got the resources in the society to the point where I think a lot of things should be considered opportunities and not just like crises that we get melancholic about. Yeah.
All right, I think that we are at time. Adolfo, thank you so much. I encourage you, will you be at a round table later?
Yeah.
Great, so if you have more questions for Adolfo, you can find him in the hall, ask him at the round table. Thank you so much for joining us.